Chosen one, listen carefully, because what you have been calling fear is not the enemy you think it is. Fear is not here to stop you. Fear is here because something sacred is being approached. If there were no purpose ahead of you, there would be no resistance within you. Your deepest fears are not random emotions. They are signals placed at the edge of transformation. They rise precisely where your old identity can no longer follow you. That tightening in your chest, that hesitation before you step forward, that inner voice whispering, "What if?" These are not warnings to turn back. They are indicators that you are standing at the boundary between who you have been and who you are becoming. God does not guide only through peace. He also guides through pressure. Just as heat forges metal into strength, fear forges clarity when it is understood instead of avoided. You were never meant to outrun your fears. You were meant to interpret them. Every fear you carry is attached to a calling that requires courage. Fear does not show up where nothing matters. It shows up where destiny is fragile in its early stages. That is why the enemy tries to disguise fear as danger, when in truth it is direction. The very thing that scares you is often the thing that will free you, because it demands that you grow beyond the limits of comfort, approval, and certainty. God does not reveal the entire path at once. He reveals the next step, and fear often marks where that step matters most. Notice this: your fears are specific. You do not fear everything. You fear certain outcomes, certain exposures, certain responsibilities. That specificity is not accidental. It is targeted guidance. Fear highlights where faith must be exercised, not where retreat is required. When God calls someone into deeper purpose, He does not remove fear immediately. He reframes it. He teaches you to walk while it is present. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is obedience in its presence. Many chosen ones delay their destiny because they mistake discomfort for disqualification. But God does not disqualify through fear. He trains through it. Moses feared speaking. Gideon feared leadership. Esther feared exposure. David feared the giant. Each fear marked the exact place where God intended to reveal His power. Fear was not their weakness. It was the doorway through which faith became visible. If your fear feels intense right now, it is because what you are approaching carries weight. Light responsibilities do not trigger heavy emotions. And here is the truth: most never hear. Fear often rises right before alignment locks in. It is the final test of trust, not to see if you are brave enough, but to see if you are willing to move without guarantees. God rarely removes fear first. He removes it through movement. When you step forward, fear loses its authority because it was never meant to lead, only to point. So do not condemn yourself for feeling afraid. Do not label yourself weak or unfaithful. Instead, ask a different question. What is this fear trying to direct me toward? When you listen instead of resist, fear transforms into insight. When you lean in instead of pull away, fear becomes a compass. God is not using your fears to punish you. He is using them to position you. Stay here. Do not scroll away. In the next part, I will show you exactly how to decode your fears, how to tell the difference between fear that protects and fear that prepares, and how to move forward without being controlled by either. Chosen one, now let us go deeper, because not all fear is the same, and discernment here is critical. There is a difference between fear that warns and fear that prepares. Fear that warns pulls you away from alignment. Fear that prepares pushes you toward growth. Fear that warns feels chaotic, draining, and paralyzing. It shrinks your vision and disconnects you from peace. But fear that prepares feels sharp, focused, and specific. It does not scatter your mind. It concentrates it. It does not tell you to disappear. It tells you to rise. If your fear is attached to expansion, visibility, responsibility, or stepping into a role larger than your current identity, that fear is not sent to stop you. It is sent to shape you. Pay attention to how your fear behaves. Does it appear when you consider staying small? or does it appear when you imagine stepping forward? Fear that appears when you think about remaining where you are is a warning. Fear that appears when you imagine becoming more than you have been is preparation. God often uses fear as a border marker, saying, "Beyond this point, you must trust me rather than yourself." That is why fear intensifies right before purpose activates. It is the final conversation between your old self and your future calling. You have been taught that fear means don't. But in the language of the Spirit, fear often means pay attention. It highlights areas where you are about to outgrow your previous capacity. Think of a child learning to walk. The fear is not because walking is wrong, it is because balance is new. Your soul is experiencing the same thing now. You are being asked to balance at a higher level, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. Fear arises because your nervous system remembers the old limits, even while your spirit senses the new assignment. This is why your deepest fears often involve exposure, being seen, being responsible, being accountable, being impactful. These are not fears of failure alone, they are fears of significance. Many chosen ones are not afraid of losing, they are afraid of being trusted with more than they believe they can carry. But God does not call the confident, He builds confidence through calling. He does not wait for certainty, He produces certainty through obedience. There is also something else you must understand. Fear often protects the seed until the roots are strong. God allows fear to slow you just enough to deepen your dependence on Him. Without fear, you would rush ahead relying on talent, intelligence, or ambition. With fear present, you learn to lean, to listen, to pray, to move with intention. Fear humbles you before it empowers you. That humility is not weakness, it is alignment. Notice how your fear sharpens your awareness. You become more reflective, more cautious with words, more selective with relationships, more intentional with decisions. That is not regression, that is refinement. God is teaching you stewardship before expansion. He is preparing you to carry what you have asked for. Many blessings fail, not because they are too big, but because the person receiving them was not internally prepared. Fear, when interpreted correctly, is part of that preparation. So do not rush to eliminate your fear. Ask it questions, sit with it, pray through it. Fear will tell you exactly where growth is required. It will expose where faith must replace control. And when you finally move, not because fear disappeared, but because obedience outweighed it, you will discover something powerful. Fear was never stronger than you. It was simply louder before you learned how to listen properly. Stay with me. In the next part, I will show you how fear transforms once you step into alignment, why it does not vanish immediately but shifts into wisdom, authority, and spiritual clarity, and how this transformation confirms that you are walking the correct path. Now understand this, chosen one, fear does not disappear the moment you obey. It changes form. This is one of the most misunderstood truths about the path you are on. Many people believe that once they are aligned with God, fear should vanish entirely. But alignment does not remove fear, it reassigns it. Fear stops being a barrier and becomes a compass. It no longer screams, "Run." It whispers, "Be precise." It no longer drains your energy, it sharpens your discernment. This shift is subtle, but it is one of the clearest confirmations that you are walking in purpose. Before alignment, fear controls you. After alignment, fear consults you. You begin to notice that the same things that once paralyzed you now simply slow you down enough to think clearly. You still feel the weight, but it no longer crushes you. Instead, it grounds you. This is because your spirit has taken authority over your nervous system. You are no longer reacting, you are responding. That distinction is everything. This is why the chosen ones often appear calm in situations that should overwhelm them. The fear is still present, but it is organized. It has been disciplined by trust. When David faced Goliath, fear existed, but it did not dictate his identity. It informed his strategy. When Esther approached the king, fear existed, But it did not silence her voice. It clarified her timing. Fear did not stop them. It refined them. You are entering that same stage now. The fear you feel is no longer asking, "Will I survive?" It is asking, "Will I steward this correctly?" That is a higher level question. It means heaven is trusting you with something that requires maturity, not just courage. And maturity is forged where fear and faith meet, and faith leads. This is also why your intuition has become stronger lately. Fear sharpens perception when it is no longer fighting faith. You notice details you once ignored. You sense shifts in people's energy. You feel when something is off, even if it looks perfect on the surface. This is not anxiety. It is spiritual intelligence activating. God is training you to read rooms, moments, and opportunities accurately, because where you are going, missteps are costly, and discernment is essential. Here is the key revelation. The fears that remain after alignment are not about danger. They are about responsibility. You are no longer afraid of being hurt. You are afraid of mishandling what has been entrusted to you. You are no longer afraid of rejection. You are afraid of misrepresenting truth. You are no longer afraid of failure. You are afraid of compromising integrity. These are not the fears of someone who is lost. These are the concerns of someone who is being prepared for influence. God allows this type of fear because it keeps you teachable. It keeps you prayerful. It keeps you aware that the source of your strength is not self-confidence, but divine guidance. The moment fear turns into wisdom is the moment pride loses its grip. And pride is the one thing that can derail destiny faster than opposition ever could. Do not despise this stage. You are not being tested to see if you are worthy. You are being trained to see if you are ready. Fear is simply highlighting the areas where heaven is increasing your capacity. Each time you move forward despite it, something inside you expands. Your tolerance for responsibility grows. Your faith deepens. Your identity stabilizes. And here is the confirmation you need. If your fear now pushes you toward prayer instead of panic, toward reflection instead of avoidance, toward humility instead of hiding, you are exactly where you are meant to be. Fear has stopped being your enemy. It has become one of your instructors. Stay with me. In the next part, I will reveal why ignoring these fears causes stagnation, how avoidance delays destiny, and what happens the moment you finally walk directly toward the very thing you've been afraid of, because that moment is not destruction, it is activation. Chosen one, this is where many people miss their moment, not because they lack faith, but because they misunderstand fear and try to eliminate it instead of interpreting it. Avoidance feels like safety, but spiritually, avoidance is stagnation. When God uses fear as guidance and we refuse to look at it, we don't stay neutral, we slowly drift off alignment. Nothing dramatic happens at first. Life still moves. Days still pass. But momentum quietly dies. Purpose pauses, and the soul begins to feel restless without knowing why. This is why some of the most spiritually sensitive people feel stuck, even though nothing is technically wrong. They are not under attack. They are not being punished. They are simply avoiding the very direction fear is pointing toward. Fear is saying, "This matters," but avoidance replies, "Not yet." And every time that happens, destiny waits. Here is the hard truth most people never hear. What you avoid does not disappear. It accumulates. Unaddressed fear doesn't fade with time. It compounds. It turns into overthinking, exhaustion, self-doubt, and eventually numbness. Not because God withdrew, but because the signal was ignored for too long. This is why avoidance often leads to confusion. The guidance was clear once, but after repeated delay, it becomes muffled. Not because God stopped speaking, but because the heart stopped listening. You may recognize this pattern already. There were moments when something stirred inside you, an idea, a calling, a truth you needed to confront, a step you knew you had to take. Fear rose, not as panic, but as weight. And instead of asking, "What is this fear pointing to?" you asked, How do I get rid of this feeling? That question alone delayed movement, because fear was never meant to be removed, it was meant to be followed. This is especially true for chosen ones, because your fears are precision-guided. They are not random anxieties, they are targeted indicators. They flare up only around things that carry consequence. You don't fear meaningless things, you fear impactful ones. You don't feel resistance toward empty paths. You feel it toward doors that would change your identity. Avoidance feels like rest, but spiritually it creates friction. You feel tired even when you do little. You feel heavy without reason. Motivation fades, not because you are lazy, but because the soul knows it is withholding movement. Energy flows where obedience goes. When obedience stalls, energy leaks. And here is the most important realization. God does not chase you with force. He waits with patience. He will not drag you through your destiny. He will stand at the edge of it and let fear nudge you forward until you choose alignment. That choice is sacred. That choice is what makes the path yours, not just assigned to you. The moment you walk toward what you've been afraid of, not recklessly, but faithfully, everything shifts. Fear does not explode, it dissolves, not instantly but steadily. It loses authority because you are no longer running from it. And in that movement, clarity returns, strength rises, peace follows action, not the other way around. This is why breakthroughs often feel quiet at first. No thunder, no dramatic sign, just a sudden sense of rightness, a deep internal yes. The body relaxes, the mind clears, the soul exhales. That is alignment. That is fear completing its assignment. In the next part, I will explain what happens neurologically and spiritually the moment you face the fear God is using to guide you, and why that single step often unlocks multiple doors at once, collapsing delays that have lasted years. This is where movement becomes multiplication. When you finally turn toward the fear instead of away from it, something profound happens beneath the surface. Something most people never recognize, but chosen ones feel immediately. The body reacts before the mind understands. Your nervous system, which has been holding tension in preparation, begins to recalibrate. Spiritually, this is not coincidence. It is alignment activating. Fear was acting as a marker, keeping your system alert until movement began. Once movement starts, the alert shifts into strength. This is why the fear you carry does not behave like ordinary anxiety. Ordinary fear scatters, yours focuses. Ordinary fear drains, yours sharpens. That is because it was never designed to stop you. It was designed to prepare you. God does not guide chosen ones with comfort alone. He uses intensity to keep you attentive. Fear narrows your awareness so you don't drift. It pulls your attention toward the exact place where transformation is waiting. You may have noticed this already. The things you fear are not vague. They are specific. Speaking up, leaving something behind, claiming authority, stepping into visibility, trusting your intuition when others doubt it. These fears are directional. They point to growth edges, the places where your current identity can no longer contain what you're becoming. Fear appears at those edges because expansion requires the old self to loosen its grip. Here is what most people misunderstand. Fear does not mean you are unprepared. It means you are approaching the boundary of who you've been. The body interprets identity change as threat because identity equals safety. Even when the change is divine, the nervous system resists unfamiliarity. That resistance is fear. Not warning of danger, but confirmation of transition. This is why waiting for fear to disappear before acting never works. Fear only dissolves after movement, never before. If you wait for peace to arrive first, you will wait indefinitely. Peace follows obedience, not anticipation. This is a spiritual law. Every time you act in alignment despite fear, your system learns that obedience is safe. With repetition, fear loses its grip, not because the path becomes easier, but because trust becomes stronger. You may ask, what if I'm wrong? What if this fear doesn't mean what I think it means? Here is the truth. Fear that is guiding your path always comes with resonance. Even when it scares you, something inside feels awake, alert, alive. There is weight, but also meaning. Contrast that with fear that drains, fear that feels chaotic, numbing or empty. That kind of fear disconnects. The fear God uses connects. Chosen ones are wired to feel this difference, even if they can't explain it. That is why you feel restless when you avoid certain steps. The soul knows. The soul always knows. And the longer avoidance continues, the louder fear becomes, not to punish you, but to regain your attention. God is patient, but purpose is persistent. There is also a reason your deepest fears intensify right before alignment. As you approach the correct path, the ego panics. The ego fears irrelevance. It fears surrender. It fears losing control. And so it amplifies fear to keep you where you are. But beneath that amplification is a quiet truth. If you weren't close, fear wouldn't be this precise. This is the moment where many chosen ones stand at the threshold and hesitate. Not because they lack courage, but because they don't yet trust fear as guidance. They still see it as an enemy instead of a messenger. But the moment you reframe fear as instruction, its power shifts. It stops chasing you and starts walking with you. In the next part, I will reveal how ignoring fear guidance creates repeating cycles and why certain lessons, relationships, and situations keep returning until the fear they point to is faced. This will explain patterns you've seen in your own life that never fully resolved, only resurfaced in different forms. What most chosen ones do not realize is that when fear is ignored, it does not disappear. It disguises itself. It returns as repetition, the same emotional themes, the same types of relationships, the same blocked progress, the same sense of almost but not yet. This is not punishment. This is redirection repeating itself until it is acknowledged. God does not shout to correct course. He echoes, and fear is often the echo. You may have noticed how certain situations keep circling back into your life with different faces but identical energy. Different people, same emotional outcome, different opportunities, same hesitation, different seasons, same internal resistance. This is not coincidence. This is the signal you bypass trying again, because the lesson it carried was never integrated. Fear was the signpost you walked past. Chosen ones are not corrected through force, they are corrected through pattern. When fear is ignored, life reorganizes itself to recreate the same emotional conditions until you finally face the direction fear was pointing you toward. This is why avoidance feels exhausting. You are not running from danger, you are running from alignment, and alignment keeps calling. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Cycles only repeat when growth is postponed. The moment you move toward the fear instead of around it, the cycle collapses, not gradually, immediately, because the lesson was never about endurance. It was about initiation. Fear marks the doorway. Once you step through, the room behind you dissolves. This is why some of your fears feel old, older than your current circumstances. You've carried them through seasons, identities, even belief systems. That's because they are not situational fears. They are transitional fears. They appear whenever you are about to outgrow a version of yourself that once kept you safe, but now keeps you small. God uses fear not to test your strength, but to train your discernment. Over time, chosen ones learn to recognize fear patterns the way others recognize opportunities. You begin to see that fear flares up most intensely right before expansion, right before truth-telling, right before leaving what is familiar, right before stepping into authority instead of seeking permission. This is also why your deepest fears are often misunderstood by others. To them, your hesitation seems irrational. To you, it feels visceral. That's because your path is not logical. It's encoded. Fear activates where logic ends and destiny begins. Those who are not called to your path cannot feel its signals. Another important truth: fear-guided paths require solitude at first. When you begin moving toward what scares you, validation rarely arrives immediately. Support often comes later. This is intentional. If affirmation came first, you would follow approval instead of alignment. God often removes external confirmation, so you learn to trust internal direction. And yes, this is uncomfortable. Yes, it feels lonely. But loneliness here is not abandonment, it is calibration. You are learning to hear your own spirit clearly without interference. Fear isolates before it integrates. It pulls you inward so you can listen. Once you begin honoring fear as guidance, something remarkable happens. Your intuition strengthens rapidly. Decisions become clearer. Hesitation shortens. You stop overanalyzing, not because fear disappears, but because you understand it. Fear becomes information instead of intimidation. This is when momentum shifts, opportunities align, encounters feel timed, resistance lessens. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You stopped fighting the signal and started following it. In the final part, I will explain how to distinguish fear that is guiding you from fear that is distracting you, and how to act without being consumed by either. This distinction is critical because not all fear is holy. Some fear is noise, some is memory, some is conditioning. But the fear that guides your path carries a very specific signature, and once you recognize it, you will never confuse it again. There is a difference between fear that warns and fear that awakens. Most people never learn to separate the two, and that is why they remain stuck, responding to every internal alarm the same way. But chosen ones are being trained to discern. The fear that distracts feels frantic, loud, chaotic. It pushes you toward avoidance, urgency without clarity, reaction without understanding. The fear that guides, however, feels quiet but heavy. It doesn't scream. It waits. It sits in the body like a weight behind the sternum, like a pressure in the chest or a tightness in the throat that appears only when you are near something true. Guiding fear does not beg you to escape. It asks you to look closer. It shows up when you are about to speak a truth you've buried, step into a role you've delayed, or release an identity that no longer fits. It does not come with panic. It comes with significance. Even when uncomfortable, it carries a strange sense of meaning. You feel resistance, but also recognition. That recognition is the mark of alignment. Distraction fear, on the other hand, scatters your energy. It multiplies scenarios, creates imagined futures, and feeds off urgency. It pulls you away from the present moment. Guiding fear anchors you into the present. It demands presence. It slows time. You feel hyper-aware when it appears. Your senses sharpen. That is because God is drawing your attention, not warning you of danger, but of direction. This is why prayer alone does not always remove fear. Some fears are not meant to be removed. They are meant to be obeyed. When you ask God to take away a fear that was sent to guide you, the fear does not leave. It intensifies. Not because you are being ignored, but because the instruction was misunderstood. God removes what harms you. He highlights what leads you. Once you begin acting in alignment with guiding fear, small steps, not leaps, you will notice that fear does not disappear immediately. Instead, it transforms. It becomes energy, focus, momentum. What once felt like resistance becomes propulsion. This is how chosen ones move forward, trembling but obedient, uncertain but aligned. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to follow it when it points toward truth. There will be moments when you misinterpret fear. That is part of learning. You are not expected to be perfect. You are expected to be responsive. When you act and adjust, act and refine, the path clarifies. Fear becomes a compass instead of a wall, and over time you begin to trust yourself again, not because fear is gone, but because you know how to listen. Eventually, a shift occurs. You stop asking, "Why am I afraid of this?" and start asking, "What is this fear preparing me for?" That question alone reorients your entire journey. It moves you out of self-judgment and into purpose. You stop seeing fear as a flaw and start recognizing it as training. And here is the final truth you must carry with you. The fears guiding you now will not guide you forever. They appear only at thresholds. Once you cross, they release you. The fear you feel today is not permanent. It is positional. It exists because you are standing at the edge of becoming something new. This is why your fears have changed over time. What once terrified you no longer does. New fears emerged because new dimensions of you were being unlocked. God does not recycle fears unnecessarily. Each one is specific to the version of you that is being activated. So when fear arises next time, do not rush to silence it. Sit with it. Ask what it is revealing. Notice where it leads when you stop resisting. Because the path you are meant to walk is not hidden. It is marked. And the markings are not always signs of comfort. Sometimes they are signs of courage. Your deepest fears are not blocking your destiny. They are pointing to it. And the moment you stop running from them, you will realize you were never lost. You were being guided the entire time.